KJ, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. I'm thrilled to be here with you because I've been long awaiting kind of our quick conversation here around a topic that I think is touching all of us these days. Before we jump into that, I wanted to just share with anybody who might be listening a little bit more about you and your background. I know for me, when I first met you and, learned that you were the former chief people officer at Panera Bread. You also held leadership positions in HR at Cumberland Farms and CVS. Of course, the immediate thing that came to me was I am such a consumer of all of those places that thank you so much because the entire team and all of those organizations do a phenomenal job making sure me, the customer, is
Yeah.
happy. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
But aside from that, I wanted to give you a chance to share a little bit more about your background before we jump into that conversation that we wanted to chat about, which was transitions.
Sure. So I spent about 30 plus years in corporate America. You named some of the big companies. I actually started my career though in consulting with an emphasis in change management. So sort of from day one, I've been focused on helping people navigate change and transition and just applied it differently either through consulting or in big companies. And as a chief people officer, I think that was kind of a key focus of my job was helping organizations grow and change through the individuals growing and changing in the organization. So I'm
Yeah.
also married my college sweetheart. We have two grown children, and I have one beautiful little granddaughter who's 2.5. So very lucky.
Yeah, I would say very, very lucky. Well, that's really why I wanted to have a conversation with you because it's April, National Stress Month, and so much stress that I have heard from people, as well as even in my own life, comes from transitions and
Mhm.
really that element of change that we have to adapt to and be more agile with as these things, life, if you will, comes our way. So, can you share a little bit more about that, whether it be from your experience at the large organizations or independently, being an expert in this area? What you see in terms of transitions driving stress, and then, sometimes that's good, other times it's not so great, right?
Right,
Tell me a
right.
little bit more about your thoughts around that.
So there's an expression I always loved, and it said the one thing that is for sure is change. Change is always happening, always occurring, and sometimes on a smaller scale, sometimes on a really big scale. And that's, I think, when you get into the definition of life transitions, it's those more major changes. And one of the things that's fascinating to me is that with change comes stress, even change that we self select, even change that we view as amazing, incredible, wonderful for us. So, getting married, having a child, finally getting the promotion that you wanted is stressful, inherently stressful. And I've thought a lot about why that is. And I think a lot of it has to do with even with good change, there's loss. There's letting go of things that have been very important to you. So it can be things that are familiar, things that you already know that you're able to deliver and accomplish. It can be letting go of a team or friends, a community that's important to you. And with that sense of loss comes some fear and some stress. And even when you're leaning into something that's amazingly wonderful, it doesn't take over or take away the stress. So I think a lot of people, especially in changes that we produce for ourselves, it's almost like people push that down and say, oh, I wanted this. I wanted the promotion. I wanted, to have a child. It doesn't mean that it's not hard. And it doesn't mean that it's not stressful. Um, so,
It's so interesting that you just said that. So I have a 24-year-old daughter, and she's working as a consultant in Manhattan for a large firm.
yeah.
And people ask her, how are you doing? Do you like your job? It's her first job out of college, and she's doing great. She said, and her response is, I'm living the dream. And I chuckle when I hear it
Yep.
because her next sentence is, this is what I've planned for my whole life.
Hmm.
I went to school for this. I went to school for accounting. I got my master's. I wanted this big job in Manhattan, and I'm living the dream. But I think she says it with this, almost to your point, we plan our lives in hopes of achieving these things. But I agree with you. I think if she were on the phone, she'd say, it's not that I'm not stressed. It's not that it doesn't put the right amount of pressure on
Right.
me to kind of up my game in a new, my first job ever in the big world. But
Hmm.
I think it's interesting that you say that.
Yeah.
I know also for me, whenever I've transitioned into new jobs, having those opportunities, it's exciting and exhilarating, but it's also super stressful.
Right. Right. And you sort of have to lean in differently and tackle things differently. And when you were talking about your daughter and you were playing it, I didn't hear her say it, but there's almost a little bit of it's the expected answer. And there's a little bit of a flippant, like I'm living the dream, because people don't necessarily want to hear her say, like, well, this is harder than I thought it was going to be, or, oh, I have moments of doubt, right? Those are probably there, but we tend to keep those more inside, which sometimes can also add to the stress.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So let's fast forward closer to maybe you and I, not my
Mhm.
daughter and the young generation. But, we also find ourselves faced with changes that either are unexpected or maybe something we anticipated, like always anticipating retirement from maybe very significant jobs because, like you just mentioned, you have a granddaughter. Maybe you want to transition your life so that your focus is in different places, whereas maybe the focus has been on work for the majority of the last 30 years. Have you worked and counseled individuals around that type of transition of almost a letting go, not adding on to?
Yes. In fact, I'm doing that work right now. So I myself retired from corporate America about not quite 2 years ago. And it was sooner than I anticipated. And like your daughter, one of the most interesting things is when I would tell people, like, oh, I've decided to retire, they would say, oh, congratulations, KJ. That's wonderful. What are you doing now? What are you going to do now? And I was like, oh, okay. So, um, moving through a big transition, especially a transition like retirement, there's a lot of fear that comes with it, and there's that loss again. There's a loss of identity. So, I've been this person, this corporate person, for 30 years, and now I'm not. And so, I started a company with a friend of mine who went through a similar transition, and we help people really take the time to think and reflect on seeing retirement not as an end and not as a loss, but as the beginning of something very intentional, as the opportunity to really choose how to use your gifts in a way that's more meaningful to you as an individual. And a big part of that is what we really encourage is something we call transformative travel. And it's about taking yourself out of your day-to-day environment and going someplace new where there's no expectations, nobody knows you, and giving yourself a chance to really just be, to just be.
Almost like what I hear you saying in that is that you're encouraging people to rediscover who they might be
Mhm.
without the title, the
Mhm.
organization, maybe even the environment that they've held themselves in, because sometimes it actually means changing your environment as well, when maybe where you live or things like that. So you're kind of trying to get someone back down to baseline,
Yes.
truly reflecting who they are. Oh yeah,
Yes.
that sounds really exciting, but also probably scary for individuals who have identified themselves with their work for many years. I mean, you know that in the United States, one of the first questions that people ask one another when they meet is, "Well, what do you do?" Right?
Right.
It's so much, ingrained in our identity here. So that that
Absolutely.
sounds that sounds really. I would think it sounds rewarding. I have one more question for you because I know we don't have a ton of time today, but I wanted to ask you when I heard that you talked about intentionality and the intentionality of this chapter of your life being intentional and really figuring out who you are. I feel like some of the best organizations do that with their individuals anyway. So can you circle back and say, okay, I was a chief people officer, I was CHRO, like did some of the philosophy that you had within those organizations have that intentionality or the ability for the individual to find themselves and their strengths within their work? And I'm just curious, we've never
Yeah.
talked about this before, but to me, it's an essential element of serving in a meaningful way, through your work, even before I'm going to say quote unquote retirement.
Absolutely. I think the most successful organizations, truly thriving organizations, are made up of thriving individuals. And so companies that recognize that we all have superpowers, we all have incredible strengths, and we all want to feel appreciated and recognized for what we contribute and what we bring to the table. And so organizations that spend time really investing in their people, understanding their people, and developing leaders who are confident enough to let others shine, I think really are a level above. And for most of my career, it was about engagement, measuring engagement. It was the measurement that was available at the time and really trying to understand how people feel. I think it's moving now to something bigger, to more around the concept of well-being, which is thriving in life overall and not just being engaged at work. Because you can be engaged at work and not be thriving. And I think when that's the case, you don't get somebody's full best self. And so I know when I was at Panera, the pillars of well-being became the pillars of our people strategy. And we really worked to address and fill every pillar so that we could help people be their best self. And, I would give us maybe a B minus. We didn't get all the way to bright. We still had some areas, particularly I think in the area of mental health, where we didn't have enough to really help people and meet the needs of the organization or our society overall.
Well, I mean, it's ever evolving, right? And I even think your
Absolutely.
definition of kind of what an employer owns, what they can do, the measurement, all of those things, they're continued to advance. As I'm thinking about all of the changes that you're talking about, whether it be at the beginning of the career or your end of the career, my immediate question would be, what advice do you have for people so that they can prepare for these transitions or get through them more effectively?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that come to mind. First of all, is give yourself grace. Give yourself time to be, give yourself time to think. You don't have to have an answer immediately. The second I would say is embrace paradox, right? We talked about change and good change, challenging change, but in it all, there's often these conflicting emotions. There's the excitement, the high energy, this is something wonderful, and there's fear and there's loss. Hold all of them together, and they'll help you find a path through. The reason you're experiencing conflicting emotions is because you need to work through and process something. So don't push away the fear, push away the loss, embrace it, think about it, move through it. And then lastly, I would say, and this I've always found true for me, is to really reconnect with your purpose. Like, what is it that I'm really trying to accomplish? What really gives me the greatest joy in life? And how do I use that clarity of purpose to be as centered as I can as I navigate all the turbulence associated with the change.
That resonates so much with me. I think each time that I've either considered a change or gone through a change, I think coming back to purpose, and then it goes back to what you said earlier, which is intentionality. That tends to become, this stability or stabilizing factor that, does this make sense, that it gives you more confidence?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right? Through the process.
Yep.
So that's super advice, but also it forces you to be true to yourself along the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And when we're truly anchored in our purpose, I think we're at our best. It's what gives us the most joy. And when you have joy, things seem easier. So when you're in a hard time, finding that true connection to yourself, the joy has room to come in.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense to me. It also feels like if you have that focus, you're also able to separate the noise and push the noise out, so you're not as distracted by what potentially could distract you. So that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much again for taking a bit of time just to chat with me about transitions. It makes a lot of sense these days with everything everyone's challenged with. And I think this was an amazing discussion, just to make sure that we can get through this month as well as the rest of the year in the best way possible. Thank you. So good to see you again.
Thank you. You too.